The only difference on this by me running at the district level versus you running at the building level is like when we look at a grade level, we're looking at 700, 750, 800 kids here versus 200 or 230 kids. Otherwise, they're going to look pretty similar. And frankly, across our three buildings, reading may look a little more different from building to building. We know based on student population, the kinds of assessments we're talking about. But your graphs are going to come out looking pretty similar shapes, too, for what's graphed. The query that we're going to run, again, is a built-in growth query. And most of the time, when we run a query, we don't touch this pull-down menu. But we're going to change it now. That's step one, is we're going to change that pull-down menu to number 11, which is student performance gains. And once we've selected that, the next thing we need to select is the subject. And I'm gonna choose reading again. Really, you're going to see a bunch of subjects under there. For this right now, we're really looking at reading and math today. Excuse me. And then, this will confound you if you forget this one. We want to change the year to all years. Okay? Because we're going to look at growth across years. Now, if we had an assessment that we gave multiple times during the year, we could do this query within 1 year as long as we had that assessment. So for example, like with fluency, we could go ahead and do that 3 times during the year and show growth from fall to spring fluency. So it's not that every time, but for the kinds of assessments we're looking at, like NWA to NWA, ISAT to ISAT, we want to include multiple years worth of data. Then we're going to go ahead and I'm going to just, I guess I'm not going to do that there, but I'm going to move this guy over a little bit so I can see things. And now we're going to refresh our assessments. And when I do that, it's just picking this first assessment. I want my base test. I want to look at growth on NWA map reading from last year. Let's say we're going to look at this year's 6th graders. So, excuse me, from 2 years ago, 08-09, to last year, to 09-10. I want to see how much this year's 6th graders grew as 5th graders. So the first thing I need is that assessment from 4th grade. So we're going to go ahead and see what we've got here. And I am running out of space. I got to do that again. And I want 08-09 map reading 4th grade. So this does require using your brain a little bit to figure out how old those kids were. So this year 6th graders were 4th graders 2 years ago. And then for 09-10, it's already making an educated guess. Oh, well, if you grab map reading for those kids, you probably want to see ISAT reading or map reading. And I don't want to see ISAT because they're on different scales, very similar scales. They're both using that similar kind of interval scale, and we know the numbers come out to be about the same, right? Like a 220 is pretty close to a 220, but they're not exactly the same. I want this map reading 05. And then again, here's what this next question is asking you as the user. This tolerance, percent tolerance, is saying how much growth from the first test, 4th grade, to the second test, 5th grade, do they have to grow to show that that they're actually making real growth? Because we know if a kid is just breathing and coming to school, they should be making some growth, no matter what. So how much growth do they have to show to make real growth? Inform puts a default of 2% in there. And again, one of the things that Janelle and I did last year was we looked at map scales and ISAT scales, grade level by grade level, and compared cell to cell what the percentage changes were, and 2% is pretty good. That's a pretty good default for them to stick in there. At least for us in Illinois, and they're sticking the same default in there for everyone. The range was a little bit more like 1.5 to 2.5, so if you really wanted to be sophisticated, we could go through and figure out what that number should be for this test to this test. But for right now, as a rule of thumb, we're saying you can go ahead and actually stick with that 2.0. Now, we may get to the point where with some local assessment, we say, we know from looking at kids that we're really looking at 3% of growth or 1% of growth, and based on the assessment and the kids and past performance, and we would involve teachers actually in helping, just like developing a rubric or a cut score, we would involve teachers in helping us make that decision initially. Which of these kids do you think really exhibited enough growth? And then we would backwards go and say, what were their scores? But this 2% is pretty good for our purposes on MAP and on ISAT. So if you go playing around with this with Access, we don't have a clue. Okay? So I don't want to claim what I can't claim there. Now the last piece is what's determined by base test. This is asking you, do you want to say they're meeting or not meeting based on the first test as 4th graders or the second test as 5th graders? Well, I'm a 6th grade teacher doing this. I want it to be based on that 5th grade test. I want to know most recently, are these kids in my meets category or my not meets category? That's what I want to know. There's no right or wrong to this bottom, but I'm just trying to frame this for the purposes that you might use this with teachers, whether it's this Friday or 6 weeks from now at a math group meeting or a whole grade level meeting or something else. I want it to be that more recent data in this case. There would be other times, like if Janelle's preparing a presentation for the board, that she might want to use the base test and say, look at how those kids who in 3rd grade 2 years ago were doing, and look at how much growth they've made now. And that would be a really powerful reason why to choose the base target, or the base test as the target, excuse me. And then I'm just going to come over here and click this and let the magic happen. Now, you are looking at 3 graphs here. So I'm going to remind everybody, there are 3 graphs showing up here on this single picture. Graph number 1, only look at the orange for graph number 1. Pretend there's nothing else up there but the orange. And what the orange is telling us is on 5th grade math, last spring, last May, our 6th graders, so if last May when they were 5th graders, I just said, here's the percent of kids who met and didn't meet on MAP reading in 5th grade. If I'd shown that to you over Memorial Day weekend, that would be this orange graph. Does that make sense? And it's still the same, it's just they're 6th graders now, and it's their scores though from last spring. Then, this graph is, if I add this column and this column, that is these kids. So if I were to look at the names of the kids in here, all of their names appear either in the green column, it's good news because they're growing, or the blue column. Not as good news because they have not grown as much. We'll come back to that. And same thing over here. All of these kids' names are listed in here. And they can do this all in one graph because we're just using percentages over on the y-axis. So, what are you looking at then? Then I'm saying, here are my kids who last spring on MAP were meeting or exceeding in reading. And of those kids, all the kids in here showed growth too. This is where we want as many kids as possible. This is where you want your own personal child, is to be in this group. They're meeting and they're showing growth. These kids are the kids we oftentimes talk about the least. These are the kids who are meeting and exceeding, but they're not showing growth, at least according to MAP reading from 4th grade to 5th grade. Then we come over here. So all these kids we want to have some concern about, right? Because they're not meeting. But these kids, either what we're doing and or what they're doing and their parents are doing, something's working there. And they're making growth beyond just kind of normal sitting in the classroom growth. And so that's fantastic. Is it enough growth to catch them up to get there? I don't know. But, we have to go down and start looking at the individual kid. Go ahead.
The making growth, is that based on the 2%?
That's based on the 2%. Okay. That's based on the 2% in this case. Which for some kids, if you look at the target score for math, it's going to be higher or lower than that. Okay? For a lot of kids, especially kids who score kind of in the middle around where you would expect kids in that grade level to score, it's going to be pretty close to that 2% actually. Then these kids, these are the kids where the sirens are going off for us. Because for these kids, they're in here, they're not meeting standards as of last spring on MAP, and they're not showing growth. according to that 2% from 4th grade to 5th grade. So again, I'm a 6th grade teacher. I'm sitting there with my team. We're 3-4 weeks now into middle school life with these kids, and I want to know who are we going to first really start to put some stuff in. Now, I know their names at this point. Some of them have left a strong impression on me one way or the other. But this is really going to help make sure I'm not having somebody fall through the cracks. I at least want to start looking in here and getting some questions. Now remember, how do I take this now and turn it into instruction? Well, I want to know who these kids are. Here's their names. Now remember, I'm seeing across the grade levels. You would be seeing the entire building if you wanted to do this as a grade level. Building leaders would have school-wide access. A team would see just the kids on their team. So they're going to see that manageable number of kids and say, whoa, okay. And they might see a surprise or not. They can sort them real easily if they want to. They can do all kinds of stuff. And they can even just click on this little green X up there, and they can then export their names to Excel. They can have another teammate, since they've all got computers, pop open the gradebook for reading, and they can make groups. They can make a group in their gradebook, and so that now, every time they're in just doing regular day-to-day reading assessment, it's serving as a reminder. It's also serving as an analysis tool, because we can just view those kids in the gradebook, and we can analyze based on their performance. So again, right here what we've got, I think with this one query, and I'm going to show it to you again, and I'm going to, just with one little switch, make it even more complicated. But provide even better information. It's the exact kind of information that we know you guys are looking for. But what we've got then is with this one query, I believe that if I was having the opportunity to lead this Institute Day in one of our middle schools, and this was like aligned with what we needed to do for our school improvement team, so that's a big if. But if it was, I could walk the staff through this query, really help them understand it. They'd be out in their teams. And then let them start discussing it. And again, when we do the second one, I'll give you some of the kinds of questions that I would be asking them. We'll flow right into that. Let them have at it. Then go on and do the same thing for math. Maybe do it for ISAT and NWEA. Easily we could spend an hour just looking at this, getting groups of kids hypothesizing about what's going on here. Because we know the kids a little bit now. We've been with them for a bunch of weeks. We could start developing those hypotheses and then spend the rest of the afternoon starting action plans. Because that's the goal here. The goal isn't to get so knee-deep and informed that we say, wow, that was really cool, we clicked on a lot today. The goal is to come out of this saying, this is what we're going to do for these kids in this unit. This is what we're going to do for these kids in this unit. This is how what we need to learn as adults to change our instruction for these kids all year long. And I think that with just a couple queries, we can really get people very, very deep into that instructional realm and give people a good experience with Inform, too.
Jason, what is that category number on
That's their score.
the ranking?
Yeah, that's their score on last spring's map, on whatever you select as the target.
Can we drill down further into the student?
Yeah, well, yeah, when you drill into the student, you get what you always get for the student, which is their assessment profile on the left, which says everything under the kitchen sink, everything, including the kitchen sink,
Yeah,
excuse
okay.
me, and their grades from Power School, or under. So, and like here in the grades, I mean, again, you've got sorting features like this. It's sorting their grades by default, by title. I might want to sort them by year.
So is that the data they would use to form their groups, their instructional groups you're talking about?
Well, that's why I'm saying the whole mix of this, because of course forming instructional groups, it's not 100% clean from the data.
Yeah.
The data gives me some indicators, and then that's where that conversation takes place. So I'm saying this one query, you run it once for math, once for ISAT. I mean, I want it, this is not my end goal of perfect use of data. I want local assessment data in there. I want more appropriate assessment data in there. I mean, some of this, the reading data, this is not appropriate for large numbers of our kids. We know that. So that's where Inform will be a better and better tool the more and more meaningful data goes in there. As we put more data in there both over time and that data is more meaningful for who those kids are and who the teachers are, this becomes even more powerful. But for many of our kids, this gives us a really good starting point. For lots of our kids in math, this gives us a good starting point. It certainly frames some important questions in our head. And again, our goal, and we said this on Monday, is not to have people get stuck in tools. Our goal is to be looking at instructional stuff. I want to go on to the second demo because we want to have you creating stuff for the Institute Day today too. I mean, so we're feeling like we're pretty ready to go this afternoon. So let me go on to the second demo, and then during that second one, I will throw out some of those kinds of questions, which no matter whether you're using Inform or not ultimately on this day, or if we're pulling the groups and just giving them the groups, some of these questions are the kind of questions that you've probably already thought of, but may be helpful. And I'd like people at that point to also share other kind of think aloud questions so we all can benefit from. These are the kind of questions our teams should be wrestling with at the group level. And Janelle's going to
Jason,
write those down. Don't go yet.
So back me, like, if you're going to go back to the student list and then back to the graph, what would be your little place there?
Oh, good question, Marty.
Okay, right here, well, first of all, up at the top, you've got these buttons, okay? This button is your main query window, the button all the way on the left. It's cut off a little bit with the projector. So that button all the way to the left is where I was doing all the work until Candace said, can we drill down even further? And as soon as I double-clicked on that student, this shifted to this button. So let me, just to illustrate that, you can see, there I am, that's exactly where we were, and I'll go to a different kid now just to really prove it here. We'll go to Arturo, and now it's shifted to that second button, second tab, excuse me, there. So that means I'm in, you can see the single body right there. The shadowy figure is supposed to be a student, not the scary guy. And so that's one place. So you can always get back here by going here, and then you're like, well, I don't want the list of kids. I want the graph. Now you got to understand some of this stuff. This was all last year. I couldn't have answered this question, even though we've been using it since June already. At this point, I've got these little guys right here. Drill down, table format, query controls. There's a little gear, and then graph. So those four, I'm still in the same data set is still highlighted. So, for example, I could go back to my query and change the query right now. We'll do that in 1 second. Neat one, huh? Yeah, well, you know when I found out that one? Like May, right? Okay. So, graph. This is, again, why what we said on Monday, our goal is not for teachers. We're not teaching anybody to use Inform ever. That was the plan when we all had a meeting back at Lake Cook, and we all debriefed after that and said, yeah, we're going to go ahead with this. But the plan at that time was there was no rollout for this. This is not the grade book. Partly because the way we're using it, the only person who's putting data in here right now is me. I'm pulling it in chunks. So we do a spreadsheet somehow. It gets into a spreadsheet, and then it goes into here. So you can't mess it up. The way you can mess it up is by not understanding what this means and making bad decisions as a result. That's the bigger concern. You got to know your assessments and understand what you're asking the computer so that we make good instructional decisions and don't make decisions that we don't know about. But that's not any different than any time we're using assessment stuff. So we think people will learn Inform, and we've seen that already. We've got our half dozen of middle school people who just kind of picked it up really quickly and can navigate around, and I'm sure can show me little things that I haven't seen, and that's fine, but they can't damage the data. Versus in the grade book, a teacher can damage the team's data real easily, because that's your input point too. So hopefully that answers that. That was a really good question. I want to go and I'm going to now, instead of doing an entirely new query, I'm going to just go back to this query button. Query number 2.